The problem in nutrition is a lot of people have preconceived ideas that they don't change for the rest of their life. They're sort of this, I'm in this camp, I'm not in this camp. I'm a keto person, I'm a paleo person, I'm an anti-fat person, I'm a fasting person.
It's like religion.
Yeah, it is. And I think as we know, many people no longer believe in God, this has replaced religion, and you can join a group, whether it's vegan, keto, whatever it is, gluten-free, there's a religion for you. But like religion, you don't like to give it up very easily or say, actually, I don't believe it anymore.
Welcome back to Brave New World, the Standards podcast where we explore the cutting edge of science, medicine, and the future of humankind. I'm your host, Evgeny Lebedev. And in this series, we're venturing into the realms of neuroscience, longevity, consciousness, and the extraordinary breakthroughs reshaping human experience. Today, we turn our attention to a subject that affects every single one of us, food. More specifically, how we eat interacts with our unique biology, and why so much of what we thought we knew about nutrition is wrong. My guests are Professor Tim Spector, genetic epidemiologist, author, and one of the world's leading researchers on the gut microbiome, and Dr. Federica Amati, medical scientist and nutritionist whose work translates the latest discoveries in gut health into practical, everyday guidance. Together, they're part of ZOE, the company and research program that has revolutionized how we understand food, health, and personalized nutrition. Federica and Tim, warm welcome to Brave New World. It's a huge privilege to have you both on the show. I just wanted to start with something a bit fun but at the same time important and gripping, talking about myth busting. What's the single biggest myth we can bust in nutrition?
There's so many, and has it changed over the time, over recent years, I think is the other sort of question. Because I probably would have said the calorie myth, but certainly in this country, I think the message has got out there that calories are not everything, and that just by counting calories, you're not really going to lose weight. So I think I would have said that a few years ago. People are still worried about fat being bad generally, and that's rubbish.
Yeah. So it was generally accepted that fat makes you fatter.
Yes, and unhealthier, and gives you heart disease, and so it was a thing to be avoided, and that has caused all the problems really of the last sort of 40 years of nutrition. So I think they're still the two main ones, and I think we're making progress on them, but I think they're still out there as the main, as I think the big ones. You go to the NHS website, it's still there. The obsession with calories and fat is still written all over it. They haven't updated that for 10 years, and it was already 10 years out of date when it was put up there. So, yeah, big myths we need to dispel.
What is the truth about fat?
Truth about fat is there's good fats and bad fats, and nothing wrong with fat in general if it's the healthy type, and we do need fat to survive. And we shouldn't be avoiding all fats, because saturated fat is the one that's generally demonized. But if you put that in the right product, like olive oil, it turns out to be overall very beneficial. And so by reducing things to these macronutrients of good or bad, we're totally missing the plot about how to select healthy foods and how to make the right food choices. So yes, there are some unhealthy fats. They're used in high-risk processed foods. Obviously, trans fats probably killed millions of people around the world. But there are also many good fats and products that are fatty products that are actually good for you, like yogurts and cheese. And you just by fermenting it, you can transform it into something healthy as well. So we shouldn't make any link between the word fat, which just happens to be the same as being obese, with being bad. It's just terrible marketing, whoever came up with the word fat.
And why does it take so long for the NHS to catch up?
Great question. I think there's a lot of lobbying by the food industry to make sure they don't change anything, because they realize that what they say does have knock-on effects on legal, what claims food manufacturers can make and the foods that are produced. It can have knock-on effects on how government then prescribes food in schools, institutions, etc. So huge pressure not to change things, because the food industry wants to keep everything the same. They want to keep making profits. They don't want any limitations or rules. The second is they're very conservative, and they're very frightened about making any changes. But I think it's predominantly the pressure of the food industry that stops the latest science getting into our guidelines. Because if you asked 100 nutritionists at the moment, which of these NHS guidelines are correct, most would agree that there's many that should be changed. So the vast majority. So they're totally out of step with current science and current nutritional thinking. And it's very sad, really, because people are now just sort of dismissing them as any useful authority in this whole area, which means you don't then trust them to make any good decisions moving forward. So they still, for example, one of the top 8 tips in the NHS is you should never skip meals.
Right.
One of the cardinal 8 rules for healthy living. Mm-hmm. There have been over 20 randomized controlled trials showing that skipping meals or skipping breakfast does not cause any harm. And in many of those studies shows it actually has some benefits. So they're encouraging poor habits, snacking.
The NHS is a huge operation. And when you think about all the competing interests, it still hasn't moved from treating disease to prevention. And oftentimes, like diet and nutrition comes into prevention. So it's not just a problem with nutrition, it's a problem with prevention as a whole. This is too big, and so it's very slow to change. And to Tim's point, they don't look at scientific consensus to change policy quickly. It takes a really long time. Yeah. But it's also because it's just underfunded and absolutely overrun. So it's hard to pinpoint one reason. It's like the whole system needs to change, really.
Well, 10 to 20 years out of step is big.
Yeah.
And I spoke about this in Parliament, about the fact that if prevention becomes more the norm, it'd be huge saving for the economy, but it seems to be not yet penetrating.
Well, they couldn't change any of those guidelines without consultation with the food industry. Mm-hmm. It's sort of built into this whole system that once they've made something that's favourable for the food industry, they can't really change it. And I think that's an inherent problem. It's like people being asked to mark their own homework. So why would you say, oh, yes, we got it wrong? They've never once said they've got it wrong. Whereas every good scientist should say, I've got lots of things wrong. I made lots of mistakes in my career, but the new science is this. They don't do that because they worry that they then will lose the respect of the population. They won't believe them, and there's this mindset that's just wrong. So it probably just needs to be scrapped with a new system.
Well, that's what science is. It's always evolving and always changing. And good scientists admit that and move forward. I'll just shoot a few others at you. Carbs are bad for you?
Yeah, no. Carbs are bad for you is like, what does that mean? So I think a lot of what we're touching on is this idea that one macronutrient is the problem or the solution. Mm-hmm. So on one hand, fat was the problem. And now you see online people who are going on fat-only diets. It's not the only solution either. Macronutrients are just groups of foods. None of them should be demonized in isolation. The whole point is dietary pattern. So how you eat things together. So carbs are bad also includes demonizing all fiber, which we know is essential for good health. So being like carbs are bad is like literally stripping, like saying that trees are bad for the environment. No, it's not how it works. I would say that, again, similar to fats, the quality of your carbs is important. So if the majority of the carbohydrates that you're eating are sort of, white bread loaf, then that's not going to be helpful for your health. Quality of the carbohydrates is important, but carbohydrates are essential for good health.
I was lucky enough to have a consultation with you, Federica, and I was interested. It was very surprising to me that canned food, for example, isn't actually bad.
Yeah.
Or long life milks.
Yeah.
Those two were surprising.
Yeah, sometimes processing can be helpful. That's why it's important to distinguish between processing that can be helpful, like freezing, canning, and processing that's higher risk. So again, an important distinction. Not all processed food is evil.
We've got a few others here. MSG is very bad for you.
No, that's a good one, MSG. Yeah, that's had like a weird, it had very bad press, MSG. But really the human evidence says that it's not.
It's the most studied chemical in nutrition, because I think it started in the 1980s. You used to get Chinese takeaway syndrome.
Yes,
and you used to have a Chinese meal and people would report having this terrible band-like headache around your head, like a migraine type headache. And you instantly blamed it on your poor choice of a Chinese restaurant. And they put MSG in there to hide some other tastes and flavors. And this was all based on one letter to the New England Journal of Medicine. It was not a proper study, but it basically triggered a complete revolution in food. People were avoiding Chinese restaurants like the plague. And there were about 10 studies then done looking at giving people MSG and a dummy powder or something in their food, and they found absolutely no effect at all. So it was like a hysterical response of the population to this umami ingredient that adds savoriness. And so it's a common ingredient in Asian cooking, and it's probably the safest one because it's been the one that's probably one of the few ones that's been most tested compared to all the other ones that we put in our food that aren't tested.
So we've touched on this already, but I might as well expand a little. One of the myths is that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. We might as well talk about time-restricted eating, or intermittent fasting, it's also known as, which does really work because
you've tried it, have you?
I do it every day.
So do I most days. And I guess it's worth saying intermittent fasting is really any interruption to your meals, either by reducing calories or increasing the time between meals, or going complete fasting periods. So it's all kinds of different approaches. But time-restricted eating is a more precise term, meaning that you eat the same amount of food over 24 hours, but you try and eat it in a smaller time window. So you're allowing say 12 to 16 hours when your gut is not working hard and it can actually repair itself and improve your gut lining over that time. So what most people do for time-restricted eating is they'd either finish eating at 6 p.m., for example, and then start eating again the next day at 8 a.m. for breakfast, or like myself, might finish at 9 and wait until after 11 a.m. the next morning to eat again. And we've seen that this suits many people, but not everybody. But if you can do it, then you do get metabolic benefits. You get some mental health benefits. You feel better, your mood's better, and it's definitely better for your gut microbiome and your gut lining in particular, which needs that time to recover. So I think this is perhaps how we used to eat anyway. And when I was spending some time with the Hadza tribe, hunter-gatherer tribe, they're not snacking in the middle of the night, getting up and raiding the fridge, having a bag of crisps in front of the TV or an ice cream late at night. Their guts are resting. And that's how I think we were supposed to always work. So I would say to everyone, give it a try if it suits you. But we think about 1 in 3 people, it doesn't suit at all. And I know the CEO at ZOE, he's a snacker. And the idea of doing this kind of fasting horrifies him. And Sarah Berry's and other colleagues can't do it. So it does vary. And perhaps we've all got slightly different metabolisms. But we did an enormous study, citizen science project with ZOE, where we asked ZOE members to take part. 140,000 agreed to do it, to basically try this for 3 weeks and see how they got on. About a third couldn't get into it, and they gave up within a week, found it too difficult to carry on, and clearly they didn't like it. A third were sort of indifferent, said, yeah, it's quite good. I think I'm going to carry on, but I'm not absolutely sure. And a third loved it and said, this has really changed my life. I'm going to do this, for the rest of my life. And those people were reporting really big improvements in mood, in energy. They had less hunger, interestingly, less GI symptoms like bloating and heartburn. They just felt really good and mentally sharp on this. So I think it's something everyone should try, but it also brings us back to this idea of moving away from this regular snacking, and that's something that that we've also seen is how harmful this snack habit that the food companies have been driving us into has made us to this idea that's also reinforced by these NHS rules about eating little and often.
Is that bad for you?
Which is actually bad for you.
Yeah, well, it's going back to personalisation. It sort of depends who you're talking to. So for example, time-restricted eating is excellent, but for some people, an earlier eating window is much better than later. So there's some people who actually do better having breakfast at 7 a.m. and finishing their meals earlier in the day. And especially when we start looking at differences between males and females. So women tend to do better with earlier eating windows, and younger populations tend to do better as well because their insulin response in the morning is higher, so the metabolic flexibility is higher. So you have to kind of personalize it. So to Tim's point, try it out, see how you feel and find what works for you. And the snacking is really interesting. I think Tim's right. Because of the way our snacking environment is built, snacking tends to be unhealthy. We did a snacking study at ZOE and found that a lot of people were having healthy meals and then undoing the benefit of those healthy meals with unhealthy snacks. But there was a subset of people who were able to have healthy meals and healthy snacks, and they actually did well. So snacking per se doesn't have to be unhealthy, but you have to be very disciplined with your snacks. And in the current food environment, to Tim's point, if you're a snacker, you're likely to be actually making your dietary quality worse, just because the foods that are available to you as a snack are really terrible. I think they're probably the worst group of foods. So when we talk about snacking, it's like this idea of, okay, you're really hungry and maybe your flight's delayed and you're caught out and you're eating an apple and some emergency nuts. You're not eating like a biscuit or a snack bar or some sort of, mega smoothie with chocolate in it. The snack environment is not supportive of healthy snacking. That's the problem. Another point that Tim raises is this idea that we're just not used to going hungry for very long anymore. And the food companies have pushed this idea of, if you're hungry for 5 minutes, well, quick, have a snack. There's a brand that literally advertises its chocolate bar by showing that when you're hungry, you're not yourself, so have this bar. But it's a brilliant advertising campaign. But actually, this idea that you can't go hungry for a little bit and wait until your next meal,
well, that's why. But I think
people don't
we've forgotten that hunger is a normal signal.
Yes.
That is a sign just of us being human, and we've had millions of years of evolution to say, okay, it's just telling me at some point I've got to eat. It doesn't mean you have to eat
in 5 minutes. Yeah.
So I think really important psychological point, and then you realise you go past that point, you forget about it, for another hour or two, and we've lost that.
And your point about tribes is absolutely right, because I've spent a lot of time with different tribes and they eat once a day.
They didn't have a word for breakfast. They didn't in this Tanzanian tribe. It just didn't exist as a word. We were trying to get someone to translate and say, what do you have for breakfast? What's this breaking the fast? Yeah. Well, they would never eat before 11. Even if they were up, at 6. So it was, this is a totally modern concept, again, given to us by our friends in the food industry who've, created a commercial opportunity, really.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about yourselves. You've both had a fascinating journey. Tim, you've done quite a number of things in the field, which has led you here. And set up
in different fields. Yeah.
in the field of science and medicine.
Yeah.
Yes, in different fields. But please do tell our listeners a bit about how you got here.
Well, I'd love to say it was a brilliant plan, but it wasn't. It was pretty random.
As most plans
I
are.
did,
exactly.
I did medicine slightly grudgingly because I couldn't think of anything else to do. And my dad said, well, if I had a degree in medicine, I wouldn't be unemployed if I needed a job. So that seemed a reasonable.
He was right.
He was right. So I did it and found I didn't like the rote learning, but I did like the research element when I was doing my own thing. So as a medical student, did some research and wrote a paper saying that coffee caused cancer of the pancreas. And it got into the Lancet, and I was very chuffed. And it launched my sort of idea that research could be fun. And it turned out to be completely false, but didn't stop me. And I went on, I was looking for research angles, couldn't really find a job, ended up as a rheumatologist. And
That's
a bone and joint doctor, arthritis, and became a consultant at St. Thomas's Hospital, and that really enjoyed it. But then I wanted to do more and more research, so I set up a twin cohort in the UK, doing twin research, comparing identical twins and non-identical twins. It was the biggest one in the UK and the most detailed one in the world. So we ended up getting 15,000 twins. Wow. Mm-hmm. So that's been running over 30 years. And that allowed me to move from just studying why people get arthritis to why people get every common disease. So that really opened up the scope of, I was just looking at twins. Is it genetic? Is it environmental? If it's environmental, what are the main factors? And that took me into genetics. I was there at the sort of the real key moments when genetic technology took off and we were finding genes, and I, discovered thousands of genes. Then got a bit disillusioned that none of them were really helpful. Really good for my CV and getting papers and being sort of famous academically, but they weren't really helping the average patient at all. At first I was disappointed because I was a geneticist. I wanted to find the genes for it. I wanted to find the genes for the microbes. What makes one microbe like you and not me, So, and then I thought, well, maybe there's more to this. This is actually quite useful because it means that if we've all got different microbes, we respond. Maybe that's why we respond differently to food. That's why even identical twins, one will get cancer and one won't. Because maybe the microbes are transforming something in the diet, producing some chemical that the other twin isn't happening. And we'd never thought about this before. We'd just never considered it. Maybe that's why our diet is much more important than we've thought. Mm-hmm. So that led to all these sort of these thoughts, and that's really what changed my mind and changed my career into moving full time into understand the gut microbiome. And then because of that, it opened up nutrition, which before that point I'd thought was the most boring science in the world. No offense, Federica, but it was like, this is really dull, right? Macronutrients and fat and no fun at all, to something that's the most exciting cutting edge science in the world. And suddenly seeing nutrition as not, 3 macronutrients and some calories, but actually 80,000 different chemicals. And so that just changed my life. About 10 years ago, a couple of entrepreneurs came to see me at one of my talks, and the company ZOE was born, which said, we can personalize nutrition and use gut health as the very basis of doing that, and hopefully transform the health of millions. And we're doing this mass science, but paid for using a sort of commercial model, but also citizen science model, because people are signing up to giving their data back and making it public.
Well, let's come back to the core of your scientific argument. But Federica, if you could tell our listeners a bit about yourself and your fascinating journey, how you come to be here. Sure.
So I'm Italian, as we talked about. So food has always been part of my culture and my home life, but I didn't know I was going to go into it for a while. My mum's a doctor, so I was planning to do medicine. And then at the last minute, I had a death in the family, which meant that I completely failed one of my chemistry exams. So I always wanted to work with people, but I really loved the science of human body and how medicines were discovered. I did pharmacology for my honours. And I really actually ended up loving chemistry in a way after hating it after that paper, and decided to continue down that route. I had the option to do postgraduate medicine, but I discovered public health And at the time, public health was not a sexy thing to do. Like, there was such a small cohort of us that even did it because it wasn't a well-known specialty to go into. But someone told me it's essentially medicine, but at population level. So you can actually help prevent disease. So I did that, worked with the WHO collaborating centre there, got very interested in prevention. And I remember I was mostly taught about policy and how you do mass vaccinations and how you look at water and all these things. And then I was in a lecture by a professor called Elia Ribberley, who runs the EPIC cohort, which is a big research arm looking at cancer and but essentially risk factors.
Who also happens to be Italian.
And also Italian. All the best ones are. And he basically was in this lecture, he was showing us these new findings that showed how eating red meat and processed meat were linked to an increased risk of colorectal cancer. I remember sitting in the front row and I was absolutely astounded. I was like, how is this not front page news? Why is no one talking about the fact that this thing we eat can cause cancer? We all knew about cigarettes, but I was mind blown. So that started me on the trajectory towards nutrition. It was all like in these academic conferences and it was all on papers, like academic papers, but it wasn't making the pages of Vogue and I really wanted it to because I thought it was fascinating and important. So then fast forward a few years and we were introduced and then of course I joined ZOE too. And ZOE has transformed the way that people think about communicating science. It's like science communications has now become its own work stream. Like if you think about what are one of the things that are lacking in the workplace and in sort of job market is people who can effectively communicate science.
I thought what we could do is since diet and nutrition is probably one of the most confusing subjects out there, it'd be really great if Tim, you could talk about the core of your argument, and then Federica, as a clinical scientist and nutritionist, could fill in the practicalities.
You're absolutely right. There is huge confusion because people now get most of their advice from social media and the internet, not from health experts or books or anything else. So you're competing with this market that's the Wild West. A lot of the people that the information is coming from are paid influencers. Yeah. What I've tried to do is, when I came into this field, I came into it fresh, so I didn't have any preconceived notions. And the problem in nutrition is a lot of people have preconceived ideas that they don't change for the rest of their life. They're sort of this, I'm in this camp, I'm not in this camp. I'm a keto person, I'm a paleo person, I'm an anti-fat person, I'm a fasting person.
It's like religion.
Yeah, it is. And I think as we know, many people no longer believe in God, this has replaced religion, and you can join a group, whether it's vegan, keto, whatever it is, gluten-free. There's a religion for you. But like religion, you don't like to give it up very easily or say, actually, I don't believe it anymore. So that's one thing been fighting. And I think the way to do that is to try and explain a new model, which everything fits into this new model that is generally, you try and encompass it. So what I've tried to do is, from the first book, really the diet myth, is talk about the center of nutrition being gut health. And if you think of it that way, it all makes sense and you can start to see what works and what doesn't. If you just think, I'm going to eat for my gut microbes, and if I eat the best way for my gut microbes will produce the best chemicals, and that will have the best effect on the rest of my body, my metabolism, my immune system, my brain. And that just naturally means that you're going to want high quality foods. You're not going to want highly processed chemicals that your body's not used to having. It won't want artificial sweeteners that have been derived from the petrochemical industry. You won't want pesticides in there that will be causing your microbes some damage. You're just starting to think like a farmer about what you put into your body in order to get the most out of it. And it also helps us because you start talking about abundance. You talk about once you put more plants inside, you're not saying, I'm going to exclude this one. You don't care about the odd exclusion. You just want more and more good foods inside you to build up a bigger arsenal of microbes that are very fussy. We found one microbe that only drinks coffee. You realize that eating meat, a lot of meat doesn't help because your microbes, they like having a little bit of meat, but too much, they're not getting the fiber they need. They really need the fiber. And you don't want too much fat because, again, yes, they quite like a bit of fat, but they don't want to be smothered by it and have nothing else because that is also bad for them. So I think that allows you to then come up with 6 key principles of eating well. And some of them have gained traction already, like eating 30 plants a week. So your 30 plants is like, get your prebiotics in. And that's a really important role. The second one is eat the rainbow, because microbes like polyphenols, which are chemicals in brightly coloured plants that are defence chemicals, also strong tastes, bitter tastes. They like those. Third is have at least 3 ferments a day. Fermented foods, this is food that's been transformed by microbes.
3, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I've picked 3 just because you've got to pick a number. And the average in this country is somewhere between 0 and 0.5. And so we did a study showing that if you can move people from half a ferment a day to 3 ferments a day, we did this in 6,000 people, they will improve their mood, their energy, their bowel, they'll have less hunger, lose weight, and it really impacts your immune system. So those 3 rules clearly aimed at the gut microbes. And we think that fermented foods have this additional effect on our body. It's only a small number of microbes compared to the ones in your gut, but they're probably acting on the immune system to really stimulate in some way we don't understand, but they definitely work. Then number 4 would be pivot your protein so that you're having less meat and more protein-rich vegetables. People don't realize that a can of beans is an incredibly amazing source of all the protein you need, plus fiber, which is what your microbes need. And we all need to be eating less meat for the planet as well. So it's a pretty good overall message. It doesn't mean 0 meat, but much, much less than we are. 5th one is calories are irrelevant for your gut microbes, but quality is really important. So cut out the ultra-processed high-risk foods. They damage your gut microbes. They damage your gut lining. Cut them out. And finally, give your gut a rest, like we've just talked about this intermittent fasting. So there are 6 rules for improving your gut health. And you can see how you can adapt that to your different religions. I don't mind what religion you are, as long as you're happy to embrace these sort of extra generally these extra things you're putting into your diet. You're putting more quality food into your diet, and you can do it in all the different ways you want to do it. So the idea is not about exclusion. It's not about a 6-week crash course. This is about something you can do really long term. Just change the way you think about food.
And if I understand correctly, it's much better to grow your own microbes as opposed to take probiotics because it's more personalised, obviously.
Taking probiotics is a bit like just going into a garden and flinging some seeds into it, or flinging some cut flowers and going, here you go. Like, it might have a momentary beneficial effect where the flowers look quite pretty in that moment. But very rarely do those probiotics actually become part of your ecosystem. So it's not that they don't work. It's just that you either have to take them every single day, and different probiotics will benefit people differently. So some people will feel no benefit. Others will find some. So you either have to keep taking them every day. But if you really want a more profound effect that's longer lasting, you need to work on the whole ecosystem, the whole environment.
But let's talk about how we feed
Federica,
let's talk about how we feed the
gut microbes.
Yes.
So we came up with those 6 principles, as Tim said, for our ZOE members, for the books, and they do work well. And understanding that it's an ecosystem effect also helps people to engage with their long-term thinking on nutrition, not just, this 6-week cabbage soup diet. You can imagine that's not going to be helpful for your gut garden, is it? So it helps to also shift the thinking from short-term intervention to like a longer-term way of thinking. So there's one big underpinning that really helps with engaging with the long-term change is also this positive nutrition. So what Tim was mentioning with the abundance, we need to be talking to people more about the foods they're lacking, what's missing from their plates, as opposed to just talking about the foods they need to eat less of. So there's some really beautiful studies that have been done looking at big population data across lots of countries, and they've identified what are the nutrition factors that are influencing health in the worst way, that are actually impacting health negatively. And sure, if you look at the data, a diet high in red meat or a diet high in processed meat or a diet high in trans fats does cause deaths globally. But it's at the bottom of the list compared to diets that are low in whole grains, diets that are low in nuts and seeds, low in fruits and vegetables. So actually, we need to pivot our thinking to, okay, what do we need to eat more of? What's actually missing from our diets that's causing all these problems? When people make that switch, it really helps to change your relationship with food. It helps you to re-embrace the joy of food as well, because, we talked about tribes earlier, and we evolved as fundamentally a species that essentially spent most of their time hunting, gathering, bringing it back to our tribe, preparing, sharing the food, and then drawing cave paintings about how we got that food. So essentially our entire lives revolved around
giant big supermarket,
food, right? Like food. So, and now we've got to this really weird place in humanity where we're trying to cut it out.
Yeah.
We're like, let's not learn about it. Oh, and also, if you don't want to spend time preparing your food, you can drink your lunch from a plastic bottle at your desk. Like, that's not at all what we've evolved to be. So we need to take it back and learn how to cook, share it with loved ones, enjoy the food. And so this pivoting, all these concepts are really nicely wound into this message of like, feed your gut microbes, add more plants to your diet, actually enjoy learning how to make a ferment in your kitchen, chop some cabbage and put it in a jar with some salt and a bit of water and see what happens.
Not worrying about your vitamins.
And and really moving away, I think this is finally happening, but moving away from this idea that if you take like a handful of pills with a glass of water, some powders into your coffee, and then, a lunch in a bottle, that's starting to die down. I'm seeing people suddenly go, actually, this is really miserable and I don't want to live like this. And I'm really happy about that, right? Because I think once we get it, actually, it's a bit deeper than just nutrition. It's really going back to, it changes the way that you're exposing yourself to several things in life, to occasions to socialize, occasions to actually slow down and prepare something. Yeah. So it's a lot of exposures are wound into the experience of how we eat. And that's why I think nutrition is such a powerful tool, right?
That's how nutrition science started after basically the Second World War. Everywhere had nutritional deficiencies in many countries, and people just weren't getting basic things to eat. And so it was all about what should people eat to get the right vitamins so they don't get all these diseases, don't get scurvy and don't get rickets and don't get, and so that's what basic nutrition science was built on. And so now we're in totally the opposite world. Still the mindset is in this, we must give people these key vitamins, chemicalizing in a way our food rather than thinking of food as a whole. And I think we're just going through a bit of a revolution now as we're trying to get rid of that old thinking that everyone's deficient in something, and that, you read all these books and programs, this particular plant here, this mango contains, 3 times the amount of manganese than this one. Therefore, if you're manganese deficient, you're going to really benefit from this. This is reductionism gone mad, but it's sort of an extension of where we've come with the old view, whereas actually it's completely irrelevant because each fruit or whatever has 800, 1,000 different chemicals, and we just focus on one because it's called a vitamin, or so a lot of these myths are being erased, but because there's commercial opportunities in selling a manganese extract or something from a mango, I'm making it up, but we're spending billions on magnesium supplements, for example, which is the trendy one at the moment.
It'll change.
Next year, it's going to be, I don't know, boron or whatever it is. And there's no evidence base for it, but people like taking these.
Whereas there is evidence base for things like a lack of these foods in your diet, and there's an evidence base for a lack of fiber impacting over 95% of adults. So if you were to look at, okay, is there anything we should really pay attention to? Fibre is the one that affects literally basically everybody in the country, here and in the US. But we're not spending billions of pounds trying to increase our intake of whole grains and nuts and seeds. It's interesting. It's just when this micronutrient mentality sticks, it's hard to get away. If you were to choose one micronutrient to worry about, it would be iron in young women under the age of 25. Because actually, quite a lot of them are iron deficient.
And it's proven.
But it's because of their poor diet.
People criticise me more for my tough stand on vitamin D than anything else because they love it. The sunshine vitamin, we love vitamin D. But the evidence just doesn't speak for it. We have this natural thing called sunlight, but we evolved to have pale skins. So even in the UK, you would get enough sunlight to last you through, and it can be supplemented a bit with some foods. So we don't need nearly as much as we're told we need, and the science doesn't back it up. So anyone in the field who's a scientist will tell you that the studies are pretty much all negative.
You do see better improvements with time spent outside and safe sun exposure. It's absolutely, your skin best, and you never want to burn, but getting some sunlight outside every day. So if you could prescribe 20 minutes of outside time, that would do better than the supplement can do. There are some groups, like people who have irritable bowel diseases, that do have vitamin D depletion. Vitamin D is very used in inflammatory response. But that's more a result of the inflammation. So you're just trying to give it give it a little bit of help. But Tim's right that overall, if you can just get outside and get a little bit of sunlight exposure, even if it's not sunny, you'll do yourself a service. And in the summer months, when we get more exposure, vitamin D is lipophilic, so it stores in your fat cells. And then our fat cells are continuously letting some bits out and back in. So you actually do get this vitamin D status, it kind of stays kind of plateaued across the winter months if you've had some sunlight exposure in the summer. So especially if you're active. So if you're physically active, it helps with that process. So really go outside 20 minutes for a walk and you'll be good.
Can you talk a little bit, Tim, about the gut-brain axis? Because I think it's really important to touch on.
Yeah, so our second brain is in our gut, and this means that we've got all the nerve connections that are all along the line of our gut. We didn't know what they were doing there for a long time. And it put it together, it's like the size of a cat's brain. And essentially it's picking up all these signals from our gut about the environment and signaling it back to our brain so we can respond properly. And it turns out that there's this link between our mood and many mental health conditions and brain disorders that are coming through our gut. So if our gut is disturbed, say eating the wrong foods, and you get inflammation in your gut, signals then go up to your brain through the vagus nerve, which is a big nerve going up to the brain, and that will trigger little sensors in the brain that say there's something wrong down here. It looks like the outside world is inflamed or causing us problems. Let's go into lockdown mode. And that will often trigger depression or anxiety and is a protective mechanism. But now, because of our bad food system and our bad food choices, this is happening permanently rather than episodically. So the brain is getting the wrong signals. It turns out that nearly every brain disorder has a connection with poor gut health. And many conditions that we thought were purely brain ones start in the gut. A great example is Parkinson's disease, which is called the shaking palsy. You get a tremor and then within about 5 years, dementia. And that starts in the gut 10 years before. So you get poor gut health, goes to constipation, and you get little proteins formed in the gut which eventually go to the brain. And many of these fermented foods I was talking about and some of these gut treatments can help common mental health conditions like depression or anxiety as much as antidepressants. So I think this is a huge new area that we should be looking to diet as the first thing to do. And it's probably why this country is going through this massive epidemic of mental health illness in kids, is partly due to this, the poor diet. And we should be throwing good diets at them rather than pills, which often don't work. And we need to go back to the holistic medicine.
I found fascinating the study you talked about where mice had a fecal transplant and anxiety was passed on.
Yeah, that's right. You can actually make a mouse anxious or non-anxious by just giving it different microbes into its gut, just showing that the powerful chemicals they're producing can pass to the brain or send those signals that completely switches off.
But also in humans, you can improve depression in adults that had drug-resistant severe depression. So, really struggling. Dietary change helped reduce their symptom severity in a clinically measurable and significant way. Like 30% reduction is huge when you're in that sort of place. And that was the dietary intervention, changing the diet, which changed the microbiome composition and actually effectively changed their mental health.
Fascinating. Are there any, in particular in relation to our conversation, any chef scientists or policymakers who inspire you?
Jamie Oliver has been championing this for a long time. He had a very bad rap when he tried to ban turkey Twizzlers, which was a form of chicken nuggets in schools about 20 years ago. He's been an example that, we should all be trying and not give up.
Yeah, I think Marion Nestle is really inspiring. She's a food scientist. Tim and Sarah, I get to work with them, but I did look up to them beforehand. And I think there's some really brilliant new policy. There's Henry Dimbleby does a really good job on the policy front, and one of the people that works with him who's really doing great work is Dolly von Tulleken as well. She's a force to be reckoned with when it comes to policy on childhood obesity. So there's good people working in this field.
Yeah, it's getting the band is growing bigger.
Good. What's a simple shift that most people could make tomorrow to feel a difference?
Eat more plants.
Exactly, you got it.
And don't follow the latest diet trend fad. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Great. Well, Federica, Tim, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Me too.
Thank you. What really stayed with me from my conversation with Tim and Federica was a reminder, firstly, I knew already, but it's always good to be reminded of how important gut health is in one's well-being and with everything, starting from digestion to mood and emotional health, and how a lot of your neurotransmitters are actually produced in your gut, and also how we should be having about 30 fruits and vegetables, or types of fruits and vegetables every week, and seeing our guts as a garden and how those things, those vegetables and those plants that we put into our gut then grow the bacteria that we need to live well. That was a good reminder.